Hi, so I've been playing around with a bunch of the new Pi 3B Pluses for a week now. Do I think the upgrade is worth it? Find out in this video. I had originally planned the unboxing of these new Pis as a MickMake mail video, but some bozo was so excited about getting them that he forgot to set up the cameras properly.
What the heck was that?
So instead I'm doing a small review of them, looking at the changes and if they actually help you at all. Essentially there are 4 changes. Faster CPU with better thermal regulation, faster Wi-Fi speeds with 5 GHz dual band and 802.11 AC supported, which also has a modular compliance certification. This reduces the cost to market for those people wanting to build a product from the Pi 3B Plus. Gigabit Ethernet, but with the caveat that it's still attached to the USB 2.0 bus, so it'll be throttled to 300 megabits per second. And lastly, Power over Ethernet support. I'll be looking at the first 3 of these in some real-world tests. If you want to see some other opinions of the new Pis, I'd suggest checking out these reviews from a couple of my mates. Links will be in the description below. I tested both a Pi 3B alongside the Pi 3B Plus, with stock Pi heatsinks from Element 14, 2 identical SD cards, and chucked into generic plastic cases. I didn't use my Uber heatsink or fans this time, as I wanted to see how the upgrade compares on stock Pis. So first up were the network tests. Of course the old Pi 3B was coming up with the predictable 93 megabits per second TCP throughput on Ethernet, along with the respectable low jitter on UDP. However, moving to the Pi 3B Plus, we see a not quite gigabit Ethernet performance of 234 megabits per second. Not fantastic, but certainly a lot better than the previous model. While UDP had a predictable reduced jitter on UDP tests. Moving to Wi-Fi, the old trusty Pi 3B returned the familiar 20 megabits per second on TCP, and the usual 2.5 millisecond jitter on UDP. So what about the Pi 3B Plus? When using the 2.5 GHz 802.11n protocol, I was getting a slightly improved 23.8 megabits per second. And jitter was about the same. Hardly a massive leap, but that was 802.11n. What about 5 GHz and 802.11ac? Now we're cooking with gas. 226 megabits per second TCP throughput is a huge improvement, along with a significantly reduced UDP jitter. Nice. So even though the 3B Plus doesn't quite reach gigabit Ethernet speeds, it's still a huge improvement over the previous model. However, whilst playing around with it, I did notice a few issues. First of all, Wi-Fi was blocked by RF kill, so I had to run this command before connecting to my access point. Bear in mind that the SD boot image on both boards was the latest Raspbian image, so if you're having issues connecting to Wi-Fi, this might be your problem. Secondly, when I was shutting down the gigabit Ethernet interface, the Pi would occasionally crash with a kernel dump. This seemed to occur more often if I downed the NIC from an SSH session. It was really quite random. However, it never happened if I did this from the console. I'm gathering that the new LAN chip being used doesn't have mature drivers for it, so I'm pretty sure this will change quickly. So next on to Phoronix tests. I ran several tests that on all SBCs hammers the CPU and raises the core temperature. First up, the RAM speed tests, which didn't show much, if at all any, improvement over the previous model. This is a fairly predictable result, as nothing has changed in terms of RAM type or speed. The timed hammer test also showed up a very similar result, along with small PT and FFmpeg. We don't start to see an improvement until we get to the Himeno benchmark, which saw almost a 20% jump on the old 3B, which is to be expected since we have a 16% faster CPU clock on the 3B Plus. While the Python benchmarker also saw a 16% faster result, and strangely enough the PHP benchmarker saw a 30% drop in performance. So all up, the results are predictably similar to the previous model. We are only talking an extra 200 MHz out of 1.2 GHz here, so we're not going to see a massive jump in performance. However, it is looking good for Python. On the thermal side, things were much cooler. See what I did there?
No.
What's wrong with it?
Just don't.
Looking at the 3B, we saw the temperature bouncing around a fair amount, with a peak of 76.3 degrees Celsius during the timed hammer tests and an overall average of 67 degrees Celsius. CPU speed stayed at a constant 1.2 GHz throughout, so the stock heatsink seems to do well. During that time we saw a peak current draw of 972 mA with an average of around 460 mA. Moving to the Pi 3B Plus, you can see the thermal regulation at work, with a 6 degree reduction in max core temperature, but the average is around the same as the Pi 3B. The 71 degree maximum is actually important here. The Pi guys have indicated that with temperatures above 70 degrees Celsius, the CPU clock will drop to 1.2 GHz and the core voltage reduced. This gives the CPU time to recover from a heavy load. On the power consumption side, current draw has changed a fair amount. The maximum current draw I saw was 1.4 amps, with a lot of similar spikes happening during the timed hammer tests. However, the average was only slightly more compared to the Pi 3B. On the booting side, there's also not much in it. The 3B had a peak current draw of 651 mA during boot, and the 3B Plus saw 694 mA. So from these results we can see that the Pi 3B Plus isn't a huge leap in performance, but rather a small incremental step. While the extra 200 MHz in clock speed doesn't do a lot for us, the upgraded CPU definitely runs cooler and has much better power integrity. Even though the gigabit Ethernet doesn't give you true gigabit speeds, it's still a whole lot better than the previous model. And don't forget, there's a much faster dual band Wi-Fi on board supporting 802.11ac. So is the upgrade worth it? If it sells at the same price as a previous model, of course it is. Now I have to go on and set up my Docker Swarm. Thanks for watching and see you next week.
What the heck was that?